All right. Good afternoon, good morning, I guess if you live in Hawaii, or good evening, depending on your time zone and when you watch. I want to thank everyone for coming to our final panel of the day, titled RNA Partnerships, M&A and Financings, What We've Learned and Where We're Headed. We have 40 minutes allotted for the discussion, including questions that we've prepared in advance, as well as questions received in advance from participants. You're all welcome to submit through the system, and I'll happily try to get to as many as I can through the discussion. We will read out the most recent ones and the relevant ones, and I'll integrate it, so we're good there. We're going to be recording this, so there'll be a playback available on MeetMax for anyone who wants to watch this or any of the other presentations. You just have to log into the system that you've already been using throughout the day. Before diving specifically into this panel, I want to again thank today's co-hosts, Dr. Frank Slack and Dr. Phil Zamore, for their support and the intro panel this morning. So without any further ado, I am now pleased to introduce our panelists. We'll start with Josh Mandelbrem, the CEO of Camp4 Therapeutics. Mr. Mandelbrem was previously an entrepreneur partner with Polaris Partners and held key business development and operations leadership roles at leading biotech companies. Most recently, he served as part of the BD group at Biogen, where he led multiple strategic activities and corresponding transactions. Prior to Biogen, Josh held several roles of increasing responsibility at Genzyme as part of their business development group with the company's rare disease business unit. Welcome, Josh. Great. Next, I'm introducing Jerry McMahon, CEO of Storm Therapeutics. Jerry has over 30 years of biotech leadership, scientific innovation, creative deal-making, and financing experience, and has been the CEO or president of multiple biotech companies, leading novel therapeutic programs from discovery, development, to drug approvals for internal and in-licensed products. Prior to his role as president and CEO of Harpoon Therapeutics, Mr. McMahon held multiple executive positions, including president and CEO of Coltan, which was acquired by Celldex, SVP, head of oncology biologics at AstraZeneca MedImmune, named from the past, and president at Sugen, which was acquired by Pfizer in San Francisco, where he was instrumental in the invention and full development of several groundbreaking protein kinase inhibitors, including sunitinib, which is also known as Sutent, a successful drug. Welcome, Jerry. Last and certainly not least, we have Leslie Williams here, co-founder, president, and CEO of HC Bioscience. Leslie is the founding CEO, an innovator and leader in protein editing with tRNA-based therapeutics. Leslie also serves on the board of directors for Ocular Therapeutics, Windtree Therapeutics, and CSCRI, Coral Sea Clinical Research Institute, that's about full, and the editorial advisory board of Life Science Leader, the advisory board of Life Science Cares, and founding ambassador at Boost by BioBreak. She serves as an EIR at UVA and University of Iowa, an operating partner at Accelerator Life Science Partners, and mentor at the GLG Institute. Not sure where she has any free time, but that's a lot. Ms. Williams was formerly the founder and CEO of Immunosant, developing immunotherapies for autoimmune diseases, and was the CEO of Ventira Pharmaceuticals, developing therapeutics using the lung as a portal for delivery. Previously, Ms. Williams also was a venture partner at Patel Ventures, an early-stage venture capital fund, and held a variety of roles at INO Therapeutics, Merck, and GSK. Welcome, Leslie. Thank you all. Thank you. So we are going to dive in. So the topic for the discussion is around the market. And I think this is something that's on everyone's mind. So we're going to get all of your perspectives on it. So we're going to try to make it as relevant as possible to RNA. Anyone can opine about the overall market. So the hope is that we can try to be as targeted as we can and provide actionable feedback, ideas, suggestions, and commentary on this space. So comparing your companies today compared to where they were several years ago, I'm curious, and I'll address this to each of you individually. What are the major differences you're seeing from a BD and financing trend today, besides it's more challenging, versus those that might have existed earlier in your company's life cycles? Maybe Leslie, we'll start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Well, I just did our Series A about a year and a half ago, so I don't have a lot of years to compare, but I can say since early 2022, seeing the market evolve, it's been pretty consistent. I mean, it's fundamentals, and I think what is really shifted is the interest in RNA-based therapeutics. I think the understanding of what RNA on a biological level, I think there's attention to the space for that reason. But as far as the fundamentals, I think it's really showing that you have a program dedicated to a specific indication, I think is critical. It's no longer, hey, we've got this great big platform, we can do everything, we've got all these indications that the platform can address. I think that is important, but with very close attention to a targeted indication where you can show that you can translate it and that you understand the very fundamentals of the development. Not only that, but also, answering the questions around your IP and your cost of goods and your manufacturing. So everything, you have to have a lot more broad understanding of how you're going to translate your technology in the marketplace to the clinic. So I think there's a lot more attention to having the specific understanding of translation.
Got it. And how was it just when you were raising your A? How challenging, if you could try to compare, if possible, then to now, even though you're not currently raising?
You're always raising,
yes.
Yeah. So compared to then, I think there's more attention now. In RNA, I think that, I think with the right valuation, so, we're beginning to approach investors for Series B. And so with, I think with what's happened in the space, I think people want to know how differentiated you are, to actually bring the, investors across the line. I think, we'll wait and see how that goes. But I think there is a lot of focus on the space, and I think it's even more active than it was before. I was raising at the time where, it was right at the point where COVID vaccines were being utilized and approved, conditionally approved and then approved. So I think there's that revolution has really opened up attention to how you can drug RNA-based therapeutics. So I see investors and partners looking at this space very seriously, really, as long as you can differentiate what you're doing. So I see it open as an open opportunity at this point. Again, not actively raising, but there's interest in what we're doing, and it's inbound interest. So that to us is exciting.
Cool. That's very encouraging. And maybe Jerry, if you can share some of your experiences early days versus now. That's true.
Yeah. So RNA is new as a drug target, as a modality. Relatively speaking, it's new. I think the COVID vaccine have really focused people's attention on this class of macromolecules. And of course, we're all doing different things to see if we can use either RNA directly or modulate RNA in different ways. When Storm started, which was a number of years ago, it was very innovative, and it was at a time when I think the macro conditions were much better than they are today for raising Series A funds. And so, like most companies that were oriented towards platforms in general, they could raise the funds to be able to do that. My company specifically raised a Series B that closed in the end of last year. So the focus there was not to add funds to enable the platform, but really to fund very specifically a product into clinical development. So an IND was filed late last year. We started clinical development work. So it wasn't to add more capital to the platform. It really was specifically to fund a clinical program, which is a more conservative, I think, financial goal, and a logical one for any company in biotech, that you want to see what you think about doing translate into a clinical reality. So what has changed, of course, is the company went from being a platform company to a clinical stage company, and the financing was appropriate and relatively conservatively funding that program. And business development, over the last couple of years has really been to fund the ongoing research work. So business development was and continues to be a mechanism to underwrite the platform work that was started with the Series A, but the Series B is really about running clinical trials. So that's a little bit about our company and how we've evolved with the financing landscape.
Very interesting. I'll try to do some takeaways between the two of you, but I want to hear Josh's perspective first and see if you all agree.
Sure. I'll try and offer up some additional insights from where I sit. So a couple things. So I've been doing this for about 6 years. We've done 3 fundraising rounds, and candidly, it's never been easy for us. It's always been long and hard and lots of conversations, and maybe that's the way it should be. I kind of now feel the way to think about fundraising, for lack of a more sophisticated way to explain it, is there's 2 categories. One is you're a superstar in your field, you've made people money before, or you happen to be working with a fund that makes it rain. And like, you see those rounds getting done and those things getting done. There's nothing wrong with that. I'd say those are usually outliers. And typically then there's category 2, which is, everybody else trying to sell a dream, or as Jerry correctly pointed out, you've gotten past the dream and it's time to execute and show that this thing, I call it flipping over a card, right? Or a set of cards if you're lucky, meaning you get to show clinically that this thing works or not. And hopefully it has read through to your platform. But, I fall in that category personally, which is, I haven't made people money. I'm not a superstar in my field. I've got great investors and I think our science is fantastic, but, we have a lot to prove. And so that's how I've always gone about fundraising. Interestingly, during the go-go years, let's call them, category 1 became expanded, and you saw a lot of rounds getting done that were almost unexplainable in a way, right? And I don't think we need to overanalyze the outcome of all that because we're dealing with it now. But in some sense, a lot of what we're seeing now for fundraising is back to reality, and the go-go years were the outliers. I think fundraising, if you talk to people, it's a long process. I think one lesson to learn that I pass on to others is relationships matter. Keep in touch with people. I think right now we're not living in a transactional environment, meaning you don't expect to cold call an investor and have them throw money at you. They're going to take their time. They're going to want to get to know you. They're going to want to follow your progress. So that's how that's how I go about fundraising. The other thing that I'll say is that I think today's theme is where's the drug, right? I think you're still seeing the A's get done, neat technology. I think, years ago it was an AAV revolution, then came editing. Now, interestingly, RNA is hot, ADCs are hot, AI is hot, and then new tech continues to be hot, protein degradation, editing, etc. On the BD front, there has been a massive shift in my view, and that falls into 3 categories. One is it takes even longer to get deals done. Those BD deals that you're reading about for research discovery deals, guess what? They take a year to get done usually if you go talk to people, which is sad actually, and tells you how inefficient we are. The economics are way down. If you look at the upfronts, I think and guess what? Where the money is, it's clinical data. So I think interestingly, why that's a problem, if you want to ask me, is we're all trying to get capital for our company. The cost of capital has gone up. And lots of times investors say do BD, and I understand that. But now all of a sudden you have to mortgage off one of your assets that could be your most valuable thing for not as much money if you don't have clinical data. And that to me is not a great outcome, right? If you think about sort of what we're trying to build and do, because it may be good for the bigger companies, but for the smaller companies, you're selling things at a discount for, I think, sometimes the wrong reasons. So that's a trend I don't love. And I'd like to see that change, and I think it will. But as far as valuations and investing, I think we're going to be living with this stuff for a while.
Interesting. So if I could try to pull this together and see if I got this right, and I think I agree with it, but data and indications and products are king. Platforms, which might have been the end all be all in the last bubble, have now been replaced by getting to the clinic or into the clinic, as Jerry's company demonstrates. But you said something interesting, Jerry, that you can use equity to fund your programs, but BD to fund your platform, which I thought was interesting. And maybe so slight contrast, Josh, what you said, where you view BD to some extent as selling off one of your programs, but perhaps maybe there's a way of doing a platform deal, which there are a lot of numbers of platform deals. I think you're right that the upfronts have not been holding steady. There's a lot more leverage in the part of the bigger companies, but can you use BD to fund the platform development and kind of continuation while using equity to fund the programs? What do you think, Josh? Or go for it, Jerry.
Yeah, I mean, I thought I would just give a little bit more specific. So we had a target, an RNA editing target called 8R1, which we thought was quite interesting, but we knew it would take a few years to get to a product. We did that with our first program, which was a target called METL3, which is a RNA methyltransferase. The company did a Series A, in 2016. So we were looking for a way to put some capital in before our drug could move it into the clinic. So we decided to look for a partner for 8R1, and we found one. We found a very good one in Exelixis. We decided that even though this was an extremely compelling target, that we could have spent some energy on creating a product similar to what we did in our first program. We decided to see if we could get the economics, to Josh's point, that would justify us doing a discovery-oriented deal very specifically around that particular program. And we did that, and that was useful. But that was, 2 or 3 years ago. So yes, it was in the middle of COVID, but it wasn't today. So we're trying to do the same thing today. We have a viral effort. We think that there could be broad RNA methyltransferases that could be useful for various respiratory viruses. And so we're out there looking to see whether there's the right partner to help us do that. We just don't know. We don't know whether the landscape today for doing those types of discovery deals, one, do they exist? And two, are we going to get the economics that we saw 2 or 3 years ago with our 8R1 program, which happened to be an immuno-oncology oriented target, which was very fashionable back then. So, my gut feeling is the deals like that are not going to be as easy to do, to Josh's point. And even if we had the term sheet, we're going to have to look seriously and say, is this something that really is going to be useful to the business, given that we're having to spend a significant amounts of capital on our lead program. So that just gives you a little bit of color into the decision-making that went around deal-making then, deal-making today on the discovery side versus, of course, where your proceeds are being dedicated. It's not being used to expand the platform, even though we are doing that. Most of the proceeds are going to the trial. So that's our specific situation. Jeff, okay.
Yeah, Josh.
I'd like to add something to this, because we're in the midst of this right now. So when you have a platform, knowing exactly what's been discussed already, that you have to have a product or a program, a specific indication that you're targeting. So the most important thing to de-risk your platform is picking the right indications. And if there are multiple indications, you then have to say, where do we have the expertise in-house if they're so disparate? So if you have a CNS indication, you have an ocular indication, and if you have an oncology indication, you can't do it all. It is absolutely, you can actually develop the technology to a certain point, but then it bifurcates. And you really, in order to get file an IND, you have to have the expertise in those particular areas. So we're looking at how do we leverage our lead indications to a point at which, what is the right time to partner, and how much data do you need in order to bring that partner in on a program that is highly specialized, where you need that external expertise. And that's, this is real time for us, because we're developing tRNA-based therapeutics, and one therapeutic can treat multiple indications. There are a lot of nuances to what we're, how we're approaching this, how we're leveraging the potential partners, and how we can de-risk and validate the platform in multiple different areas. But we can't do it all ourselves. So staying focused is absolutely critical, knowing what we want to take forward ourselves, but also knowing where we need to go and talk to the partners where they have an interest in a particular indication or a therapeutic area. So we bring them on and understand what data we need in order to bring them under the hood to really partner and work, collaboratively with us to advance.
Well, you're both talking about, and I want to hear, Josh, what your thoughts are about this, and we can move to the next topic, but you're both talking about assets that you're creating that you're then delivering a package to a pharma company, which is not necessarily the same thing as a pharma company accessing your technology to go after a target of interest to them, where it's just kind of a de novo discovery collaboration. So maybe there's slight differences or nuances depending on what you're actually selling and how much are you investing before you sell it.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah.
Go for it.
Okay, so I'll hit clean up here and try and build on this a bit. So it depends is always the great answer to this. And what I mean, so let me give a really fun example here. So it depends on the time of the year. So Leslie, I hope I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but maybe I'll use an example here. So guessing where your company's at. A discovery deal for Camp 4 right now is going to mean something different than a discovery deal for Leslie's company. And let me tell you what I mean. Right now, my annual burn rate might be 50 million or something like that, give or take. I'm going into the clinic with two things. Is a $15 to $20 million upfront deal going to solve my problems? No, it's absolutely not. But what it is going to do is give validation, because it is true that investors like when other people tell you their ideas are good ideas. So I'd really like to do a discovery deal. It's going to take a long time. I think it's important. And yes, I'm very happy to do a discovery deal in a particular area where I think there's value, but I don't plan to unlock it myself. So it both brings in upfront, it slows the burn a bit, but it gives me validation. Super valuable for me. Now, if you asked me this 3 years ago when I did a deal with Biogen and they paid me 15 million upfront, guess what? You know what my burn was the next year? 15 million. That 15 million got me through my year because I wasn't getting funded then. So two entirely different points of view on depending on the stage of my company. And what I lose sleep over, for what it's worth, is product dilution versus equity dilution. So now I've equitized the company. I've gotten it to a point where I want to flip over these cards in the clinic, and money's tight right now. And there's a big difference between a deal that's 100 million upfront or one that's a 50-50 partnership, both optically and economically. And what I worry about is product dilution, right? Because I think the point Jerry and Leslie are making is I know what that product looks like. I could draw a box around the patent. I've put money into it. And that to me is a scary one if you're not, unless you don't want to be that thing. And you're like, look, I'm happy to. I think Jerry's point is a great example. Hey, we looked at it. It was really interesting, but we didn't want to be that thing. So we were okay to sell that to Exelixis. It made sense for us, right? They had a bigger idea in mind, I would assume, right, Jerry? So I think that makes a lot of sense. But that's what I was getting back to. The point of what scares me about this environment is companies have incredibly valuable stuff that they might have to give away. And last thing I'll say is, as I did BD for 15 years, I could tell you I tried to buy Global Blood. I tried to pay for a short amount of money for Apellis, Raw Pharma. Let me tell you, nowhere near what these things were bought or what they are today. And good on those guys for getting their investors to stick to their guns when things were tight and put more money in, because those stories would have been written entirely differently had they done the deal with us. So it's just, that's the kind of stuff that I hold on to.
So I agree with you all. I'm just trying to push the envelope a little bit here. The one thing for you to think about, maybe three of you, but also the audience, is in this market, it's hard to afford a discovery organization plus clinical development. So the reflex is to just kill the discovery organization and just focus on your assets that are in the pipeline, which kills your future growth prospects. So the thinking behind doing a platform-like deal is maybe to pay for the burn of the R&D organization, and you divert them from making new molecules to making a molecule for someone else. But along the way, you don't have to pick up their costs. So it's a way of financing your R&D organization while you're building more value on the equity side. That was all I was trying to get to.
So Jeff, I will just say, since for our audience of hundreds or 10, whatever it is, just to tell you though, easier said than done. Every brilliant board member says that. And what I'm telling you is, Those things aren't happening very much right now. They take a year. So yeah, I completely agree with you. But if we're being honest and we want to push, I don't read about many of those things happening on a weekly basis. And so my advice is, yeah, we're all pounding the pavement to do it, but we can't. I agree. I'm just saying we can't lean on it the way we used to, which is really a shame, because you're exactly right. It's just a question of whether or not they're available.
You're up. Look, we're in a violent agreement here. If you look at the data,
So,
the majority of deals done are discovery and preclinical, but that's not where the biggest dollars are. So I think we're all, again, in a heated agreement. So maybe to move the conversation a little forward, Leslie, you said something interesting which I agree with, that RNA is perhaps in its moment right now because of the pandemic, and that things are actually, all things considered, better in this sector than in others. One of the reasons that we wanted to host a conference in this area. What do you think has transpired relative to the cell therapy and gene therapy and in the prior darlings? And do you think that's led to RNA being in the limelight now? Or what are some of the factors you think that are playing into this pro-RNA, and maybe what happened with some of those other sectors?
Well, I think with the gene therapies and, and then enter in RNA, what we have is personalized approaches. I think there's a lot of interest towards that. And I think some of the challenges, I think the cell-based therapy, it is a crowded space. And how do you differentiate in that space? Number one, I think what people have hung on to, which is where RNA also presents an opportunity, is that personalized approach. So it really just, I think it's the next phase of informational, delivering informational drugs that can shift broad, large sectors of disease areas, oncology, infectious disease, rare genetic disease. So it covers that same landscape, but in a much broader, with a much broader approach. I think the other things that are I think important, it's the manufacturing. Some of the challenges that how do you scale this? How do patients ultimately pay for the treatments, and how does that get translated on the back end? I think that thinking with the end in mind has been it's a big part of when we were doing our Series A. What does the product look like? How is this going to be positioned? Or is this going to have a companion diagnostic? Is this how do you scale this? Is the cost of what are the cost of goods? And I think the RNA-based approaches really are a value add in comparison to cell-based therapies because of the broad reach. And I think, but I think what's happened with the whole space is the de-risking based on the assays that have been developed, understanding the fundamental biology, understand, again, leveraging and pulling in manufacturing. All of that has really opened up, I think, RNA, and RNA has taken, the gene therapies to the next level from my perspective. Simply, I look at what we're doing with tRNA-based therapeutics. It's one therapeutic treating multiple indications, and it's gene agnostic and context agnostic. So it really just is far more scalable, and it's a small, tRNA is small. It's 70 to 90 nucleotides. So it's much easier to manufacture. You can deliver it in many different ways. You don't need just a viral vector to deliver a large molecule. So this is, it just opens up a whole new field, and, takes, I think, the gene therapy where you have, where it's not a monogenic disease, where you can really broaden the reach of the technology.
So very interesting. I guess maybe I'm curious, Jerry, your perspective on not just how the space is different from the last couple of segments, the cell therapy and gene therapy space, but how do you exploit something that's so broadly applicable as a single private biotech company? How does it, maybe that plays into partnering and spin-offs or whatever else, but how does this sector evolve with so much potential and frankly, so young of a company set doing what we're doing.
Well, it's amazing to me to see the diversity of approaches around RNA. It's just
Yeah.
quite interesting. I mean, most of us are doing very different things. So that's been kind of exciting to watch how the landscape, the RNA landscape, is so diverse, which in theory makes us all, I suppose, less competitive with each other because we're all doing very different things. So here's an example, that might be interesting. We're also working on a tRNA approach. In our case, just to give you an example of diversity of approaches, we're looking at an RNA methyltransferase that specifically can modify tRNAs. So tRNA is not our modality, but we're looking at ways to influence how tRNAs are regulated or used. And so our company is chemistry based, old-fashioned small molecule chemistry, synthetic chemistry. And we look for molecules that can modulate certain RNA methyltransferases against various substrates, whether they be polyadenylated mRNA or tRNA or any other RNA species. So we have an intrinsic diversity to what we do, but in the macro environment, there's so many different ways people are going after RNA in different way that makes it exciting. On the other side, because we are doing things that are so new and to some extent not validated, we have an intrinsic risk that is probably higher than, I think historical platform companies, because the targets haven't been validated. And the only way to validate them, in our case, is to use chemistry. So the same chemistry that is being used to hopefully make great drugs is also being used to validate, which means we have to find molecules that can modulate the target. Yes, we can do genetics, but genetics, as you know, is not a pharmacologic modifier. So we have to go and invest in finding rare, lucky chemical entities that can modulate our targets. And then once we have that tool, we can now figure out, okay, what could this target be useful for? And how do we go about doing that? So although I think the cost of goods element, which is of course chemistry, being able to hopefully allow a patient to take a pill, ultimately is useful and more cost effective as you move things into the clinic in terms of drug supply. We have an intrinsic risk that is not going to necessarily be solved by having multiple targets and multiple products. So our pipeline, if you will, has different approaches that don't necessarily mitigate the risk. So you could look at the companies like ours and say, well, that's good because your products have independent risk factors. It's not going to, if you one target, one approach, let's say against polyadenylated RNA, which is the case of our methyl-3 program, really has nothing to do with, let's say, another target that may be affecting tRNA. But, as you know, most people don't view it that way. They view it as a platform company. So we have to be careful about how we want to link our programs to each other in our particular case. But I think in the macro view of RNA, there's so much diversity in what we're doing that I think there's room for all of us if we can figure out a way to access capital. I don't think we're going to be very competitive with each other. That's just my opinion. Yep.
Jeff, you're on mute.
Somebody's on mute.
Yeah.
I was talking to myself. It was brilliant, I assure you. So you're not the 9th or 10th CRISPR-Cas9 company. There's definitely enough, enough diversity of things to focus on. I guess, Josh, just let you back clean up again. I'll let you finish off the next one. Just out of curiosity, how are you viewing this compared to the other modalities? And then I guess the follow-up is, how do you exploit this? So since there's so many different applications, what is a small biotech to do in light of all the opportunities?
Yeah, I guess, just ultimately, I do think the theme is where's the drug? That's, I started in this role as a dreamer. I still am a dreamer, but I've ultimately come to realize you got to make drugs, and drugs are hard to make. And when you have a platform, it's a privilege, but a burden, because the privilege is you feel like you can do so many things. But the burden is you just really can't do so many things for a variety of reasons, not necessarily even resources, just focus and all the things it takes to make a drug successful. So I do agree. I think more often than not, we probably aren't competing, right? Sometimes we are, but more often than not, we aren't. I think that for any category of drugs to go after, getting these things to work, I think, honestly, I think 5 years ago, I heard a panel today about drugging RNA with small molecules. We were going to crack that nut. We're still going at it. And I think there's going to be some really important things that come out of it, but it turns out it's harder than we thought, right? And I think that's, look at ADCs, as I used that example before. Now they're hot. How long have those been around for? And, the hype curve, as they say. So the nice thing is, first of all, I think RNA is a broad term. I bet you if you asked me, Leslie, and Jerry to define it, we'd have different definitions of what falls into it. Some people say RNA includes using small molecules to drug, RNA.
That's one of our 5 buckets. We would agree with that.
Yeah, totally. Like it's what you want it to be. I'm not denying that. We use all of those. Maybe, some people use mRNA, circular RNA. So it's a massive category, and it kind of, you can get there any way you want. But ultimately, each one of these things that's new has advantages and disadvantages. And I think the trick is focusing our companies enough to figure out how to make it work, and then go do more and more and more. Hey, the classic story of Alnylam, right? Didn't work here, didn't work there. Oops, now it works in the liver. We'll do that. Now we're going into the CNS, and you go forwards, backwards, sideways. And so that's kind of, to me, how I think about CAMP4. And I'm sure people think about their respective companies that way, which is try lots of things, but focus, double down once we think we've kind of unlocked at least one trick we can do with it, and kind of keep innovating in the background. But again, focus towards products, because also that's how you get capital too.
So 30 seconds, crystal ball. Go for it, Leslie. I'll let you finish.
I was just going to say, I totally agree with what Josh said. I'm a believer that you avoid double jeopardy. For proof of concept, you have a novel drug, you don't want a novel delivery. So that's why we've been really focused on lipid nanoparticles as our entry, which means we're focused on liver-based diseases to show that it works. But the crystal ball is, I think we're just getting started with RNA. I think there's room for all of us. I think, the field and the tools that are now available have enabled us to advance targeting proteins broadly, protein dysfunction specifically. And I think the next year, I think, it'll be a different discussion as hopefully funds have continued and partnerships, hopefully are alive and well by year end.
Because you said next year and it's only May. That doesn't sound good, but I unfortunately agree with you.
No, yeah.
Jerry, any last 30-second advice or crystal ball?
No, I think we just continue to do our work and find creative ways to fund. We're looking at some very creative, strategic ways to continue to fund the company that we wouldn't have done in a more, I suppose the older market. So we are being more creative about how we're looking at funding mechanisms. Yeah.
Well, I would definitely encourage all the investors and partners to give strong consideration to the companies in my 3 panels so they can help achieve their vision to ultimately help patients. So thank you both, all 3 of you, actually, for joining this. We're out of time. This was the last panel of the day. I hope you found this, not just this panel, but the entire conference of value. And as RNA takes a more prominent place in drug discovery, development, and patient treatment, we want it to be at the center of the conversation. So hopefully mission accomplished. As a reminder, a link to the panel recording and the company presentations will be available to each registrant through the link. It's available for 180 days, so make sure you watch it within that window. You can also visit the Locust Walk website to download our RNA Therapeutics landscape overview. It's also in the link within MeetMax. We'll be sending also a survey to get feedback on what you liked and what we can do to improve. So if you don't mind spending the 2 minutes, just fill it out. We would really appreciate on how to get better. So thank you. We look forward to future interactions and have a wonderful day.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. Yep.
Thank you, Jeff.